The Nintendo Switch 2. Out of the millions of Switches made, you kinda gotta feel sorry for the one that ends up on my desk. Nintendo says this Switch 2 has 10 times the graphic performance of the previous model, and like I sure hope it does, since the last one got released nearly a decade ago. It's hard to be too mad about the delay though, since Nintendo's games are pretty timeless, and they went to great lengths to match my own jerry-rig knife, and I appreciate the effort. Inside the box we have our HDMI cable, some Joy-Con leashes, a Joy-Con grip, a 60-watt USB-C charger, and my favorite piece of kit, the 4K docking station. Breath of the Wild just got real. The biggest physical change, aside from the larger screen, is how the Joy-Cons attach to the Switch 2 body. They use magnets this time around, and you already know that we're going to find out how strong those magnets are, and how fragile that connection may or may not be. With the Joy-Cons fully inserted, it is possible to just rip them away from the Switch 2 with brute force alone, not using the release latch. These will never just fall out on their own, of course, but throughout my testing, sometimes I found it was just easier to pull them away instead of hunting for the release lever, especially when you just rotate the whole Joy-Con away from the body. And I imagine I won't be the only one just skipping the release button altogether as time goes on. Also, fun fact, Nintendo has apparently coated all of their game cartridges in the world's most bitter substance called denatonium benzoate. This is to deter little kids from eating it, and I can confirm it is negative amounts of delicious, and I highly recommend that nobody lick these things. There is a bit of a fiasco surrounding some of these game cartridges, since some only include a key to download a game rather than the game being loaded on the cartridge itself. And yeah, that's pretty lame. So keep an eye out for those. This particular yucky tasting cartridge does have a full game installed on it though. So at least with this one we can play instantly without a download. I'll lower the volume, and of course I'm Team Luigi, if you catch my drift. In order for us to find out what the Switch 2 is made from, we gotta pull out the Mohs scale of hardness. If the screen is made from plastic, we'll see scratches at level 2 or 3. Glass screens will scratch at a 5 or 6, and if Nintendo splurged a bit and gave us sapphire, that would scratch at level 8 or 9. However, very quickly we see again that Nintendo has given us a level 3 plastic screen. This is not ideal. There is a permanently installed plastic layer on top of the Switch 2 display. This is not a temporary screen protector, it is extremely well secured and permanently affixed to the device. As you can see from my keys, anything metal that comes in contact with this screen will indeed leave a mark. Plastic objects, however, like my Lego or the docking station, won't leave any marks, but that also doesn't spark a whole lot of confidence. I understand that Nintendo is trying to keep screens from shattering by putting this plastic buffer layer over the top. But these permanent marks are going to be hard to swallow, and it's good to know that the screen of the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be cosmetically damaged very easily. The only way to avoid marking up the soft exterior screen is with a glass screen protector, and if I could be so bold, I'd recommend a prism screen protector from my channel sponsor Dbrand, mostly because it has an easy to install foolproof applicator. With the Joy-Cons off, we can pull out the dust removal layer and give a single simple swipe down the middle of the applicator and wait a few seconds. And now we have what the Switch 2 should have shipped with in the first place, a perfectly installed glass screen protector, which as per usual is getting no marks at a level 5. Dbrand has a deal right now where you save $35 if you buy it with a kill switch case. Oh no, Jerry, why did you break it? 1, because the durability test isn't over yet, and 2, Dbrand ships 2 of these Switch 2 screen protectors in every box. So if my Switch survives the rest of this test, I'll just throw another one on later. The link is down in the description. I still think having a plastic screen in 2025 is pretty wild. Moving over to the orange Joy-Cons, we find a whole lot more plastic, which is what we expected. There's a plastic home button and a plastic game chat button, and the joystick has a very thick rubber cap on the surface. There's definitely no durability issues here. What's really cool though is that Nintendo has again inlaid the white letters of the buttons inside the black plastic itself, meaning that no matter how many hours or decades you play this Switch 2, these letters will never rub away. Getting a closer look at the Joy-Cons, we find the secret for how they attach so firmly. These shoulder trigger buttons are actually made with steel this time around, big rectangular blocks of metal that are able to magnetically secure to the Switch 2 body. In the center is where that port that charges the Joy-Con sits, along with the optical sensor that lets the Joy-Cons become a mouse. And of course, the famous tri-point Nintendo screws that still hold everything together. It'll be fun to take these things apart during the teardown, assuming it doesn't just all break open before the end of this video. Of course. Now, there has been some concern online about this little port here that receives the Joy-Cons. I'm kind of nervous for it as well, to be honest, but it does have a little play. There's some wiggle back and forth, which might end up being a feature instead of a bug. Being totally rigid would probably make it more prone to breaking, but we'll find out for sure here in a second. You can kind of see the magnetic field that emanates from the dual magnets in the Switch with this piece of green magnet paper. But since the magnets are kind of deeply recessed inside of the Switch 2, we can get a better look when we open her up. Putting the magnet paper on the Joy-Cons themselves doesn't reveal anything, meaning all of the magnets are just inside the console and not the controllers. If the magnets were closer to the surface of the Switch, they would look kind of like these wireless charging magnets on my grip case. Magnets are pretty cool, and I have no idea how they work. Near the game cartridge slot, there is a top USB-C port that sits right next to a headphone jack and a fan vent, which has some metal fins inside. The Switch 2 does not have any water resistance at all, so definitely keep it away from liquids. The volume rocker and power button are made from plastic and are not removable. The bottom of the Switch 2 has dual stereo speakers on either side of the lower USB-C docking port. The speaker openings are covered with some really thin wire mesh. That mesh can be torn, but it won't be falling out on its own. I imagine the mesh is mostly here to keep larger debris from flowing into the console due to the airflow from the cooling fan. The kickstand on the Switch 2 is a massive improvement over the tiny little guy that came with the Switch 1. And unlike the rest of the Switch, this guy is made from metal. And I mean, don't get me wrong, plastic is not a bad thing, it's what helps keep the price of the Switch so low. It's a tad hard to fathom that kids who were born when the Switch 1 was released are now in the 3rd grade. Personally, I think Nintendo could speed up the release cadence a little bit. But let's see if any of this new generation of gamers can tell me what this is in the comments. The only decor on the Switch 2 that might end up rubbing off over time is the logo on the back. The logo is just printed right on top of the surface, and I'm glad Nintendo didn't use this same kind of printing on the buttons. I'm now the only one in the world with a Nintendo It though, so that's kinda cool. And I'm not much of a traveling gamer myself. I leave my Switch docked to the TV like 99% of the time. I do, however, like that Nintendo made the Joy-Con grip look smarter than it is by allowing LEDs from the Joy-Cons to shine up through the center of the grip when it's connected. The grip is also surprisingly strong, locking out in every direction and not falling apart or releasing the Joy-Cons even under extreme pressure. So far so good. One thing I haven't seen anyone bring up though is that while previously the Joy-Cons would only mount to the Switch in one direction, this Switch 2 however can mount the Joy-Cons on opposite sides, upside down, or even backwards. It's gonna add a whole new level of difficulty to speedrunning. But today we aren't here to play backwards. The Switch 2 has a 7.9-inch 120Hz 1080p HDR display with twice as many pixels as the Switch from a decade ago. And don't try this at home obviously, but after about 10 seconds we can see from the pixels going black and recovering that the screen is an LCD. Kind of amazing that everything is still functioning even after all it's been through. Thumbs up for that. But the worst is still yet to come. If Nintendo is only going to make one new console every decade, it needs to be structurally durable enough to last that whole time. And as we can see from the first bend, when a lot of force is applied, the Joy-Cons just kind of like to pop off on their own. And in my opinion, this is actually a good thing. For one, the angle of the bending Joy-Cons doesn't appear to damage the internal pins, no matter how many times the Joy-Con is aggressively ripped off or forced off the console backwards. Moving over to the blue controller and popping it off very aggressively forwards, both the controller and the Switch 2 itself remain undamaged. It disconnects at a gentle enough angle that the port is not disturbed or flexed beyond what it can handle. When I first saw the Switch 2 announced, I definitely had my doubts, but after holding the Switch 2 and feeling how the Joy-Cons connect, I'm very much more confident now in its ability to survive everyday life. The Switch 2 would have to go through some extremely wild and crazy situations, beyond what we do here, to sustain any permanent structural damage. It is very susceptible to cosmetic damage, however, especially the screen, but at least it'll still be functioning. Like a lizard shedding his tail, the Joy-Cons just pop off unscathed if anything weird happens. One thing that would bother me quite a bit though, considering Nintendo's dark history with the Joy-Con drift, is throwing the Switch 2 into a backpack, with the joysticks ding-a-linging around all willy-nilly. Thankfully, Dbrand also has a solution for that, and they're calling it the Kill Switch. This protects your Switch from every angle, while still letting the controllers detach. The ergonomic grips add even more protection while making the Joy-Cons easier to hold, and my favorite part is the travel case keeps the joysticks from being kinked and smashed, while at the same time holding up to 10 of the disgustingly delicious game cartridges. Dbrand secures the whole thing with Dyneema bungee cord, which is the strongest fiber in the world. Stronger than steel and light enough to float on water. It does seem like a little overkill at first, but I've been told that this is the only material that won't fray after 10,000 attachment and removal cycles. And with how long it takes Nintendo to release a new console, this case needs to last for a really long time. If you get the Kill Switch and the Prism screen protector at the same time, you'll save $35, and I'll leave a link for them down in the video description. Now, if you'll excuse me for a bit, I do have to go see what Hyrule looks like in 4K. The Nintendo Switch 2 passes my durability test a lot better than I thought it would, and thanks a ton for watching. I'll see you around.